concealed weapons carriers know that any place that they are prohibited from carrying their concealed weapon, they are prohibited. And that can be as simple as a sign out front that says concealed weapons are prohibited. That satisfies the law for those concealed weapons carriers to safely store their firearms and not take them into that facility. So each church is going to have to make its own decision. Do we want to allow concealed weapons in our church for the purpose of safety and security, or do we not? But in the event that you do, understand that there's two sides to that coin. As we saw with recent events, agitators can also carry concealed. So what you may think is a benefit may end up being a liability as well. So you just need to consider all those factors. Now, that said, if you're a church that would permit concealed weapons, if you're Second Amendment friendly, or if otherwise you feel like that's a good thing to allow into your church, then you do need to be very cautious not to single those people out and then task them with security functions.
Welcome to the GC Collective podcast, brought to you by the California Southern Baptist Convention. From local missions to global impact, we explore the vision, passion, and heart behind our collective movement in California and around the world. Where better together isn't just a motto, it's how we maximize our impact in fulfilling the Great Commission.
Hello, California Southern Baptist family. Welcome back to the GC Collective podcast. We look a little different today. I'm here in the studio by myself, but we have a full slate of personalities here to talk about a really important topic, church protection, church security. First and foremost, Jason Robertson, welcome back.
Hey, good to be back.
So you're not here. Where are you?
No, I'm in beautiful Ontario, California, down at the Gateway Seminary location.
Nice and sunny, I assume.
No, not really. It's fully overcast and raining off and on.
Oh, that's just like here in Fresno. We have a special guest, Jason, something that I never thought would happen here on the podcast.
Well, I think we're having improvements in many ways, as you've brought in now your other boss named Pete.
I know, right? I really need you to not perpetuate that. We have a special guest. His name is Pete Aguirre, and California Southern Baptist, please give a warm welcome to my brother.
Her boss.
Pete. He's my younger brother, so not my boss. Let's not get confused. Pete, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah. So we have invited you on because you are a police officer in the city of San Fernando. You've been serving there a long time. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. I'm currently the detective sergeant at the San Fernando Police Department in Northeast LA County. I've been on the job about 16 and a half years. Quite a journey. I started out on patrol, as most municipal officers do, and worked my way through field training officer, detective, patrol sergeant. Currently, I sit in the detective bureau, kind of supervising that endeavor. So I've been doing this quite a while. I love it. I wouldn't do anything else. It's the best job in the world until it's the worst job in the world.
And before that, you are former military as well.
Correct. I served in the U.S. Army from 2000 to 2004 in the 101st Airborne Division, Air Assault. And then I served 2 more years in the National Guard in California at the 40th Infantry Division. So I've had quite an adventurous professional life, I'll tell you that.
Well, on behalf of all that are listening, we want to say thank you for your service in the past and in the present. Your life, the Lord has taken you down a rough journey of serving the public. And brother, we sure appreciate it.
I appreciate that. I'll tell you, the state and country have gotten their money's worth out of me.
So, Pete, thanks for being here. You know, we're going to be talking about security at church. You serve as an officer in SoCal. These are parameters and things to think about, right? That's what we're saying here today?
Correct. Yeah, I've been a police officer for a very long time. However, this is just information for everyone to consider. This isn't legal advice. I'm not a lawyer. I don't even play one on TV. And I wouldn't presume to know as much as a lawyer does on these topics. And I wouldn't give advice per se, but I will give general knowledge information. This is all stuff that's publicly available anyway, but hopefully we can condense it into a sort of a palatable and understandable format, but this is just for informational purposes.
Yeah. And we're really grateful that you're taking the time to be with us and to help our church leaders.
And I would say the same is true for the CSBC.
Yeah.
That we're just talking about a topic, not really giving advice. And all of my fellow pastors out there know why we have to say that. And it's a lot because we're in the state of California,
Correct.
So yeah, we're just trying to have an open conversation, something that maybe you can listen to, have some of your church leaders listen to. It's a topic that needs to be talked about.
But before we get to that, we always like to talk about something happening, something to celebrate. Jason, what do we want to highlight?
Well, man, there's so much going on here at the CSBC, and more people are getting involved and taking notice of what's happening under the leadership of Dr. Pete Ramirez. And of course, we always want to celebrate what Jason Blankenship and his team are doing through the evangelism workshops and the VBS training. They're going on all across the state. They're in both English and Spanish, the evangelism training and the VBS training. You can get it in either language, and it's going on everywhere, and it's great. And, this goes when you're talking about evangelism and you're talking about discipleship and you talk about reaching people in your community, nobody's doing it better than what Jason and his team are doing. And the churches that are responding to it need to be celebrated. The baptisms are just going up and up and up, and every one of those represent another person whose life, not only now, but for eternity, is being changed. And probably that whole household is being changed. And so we thank God for what's going on.
Yeah. And we have all those events loaded on our website right now. So just go to csbc.com, click the events page, and you'll find everything that you need right there at your fingertips.
Right on.
All right. So we are here. Pete Ramirez, our executive director, he had been hearing some concerns from some of our church leaders when the incident in Minnesota happened with the protesters that came in to that church. And it really brought to the forefront a lot of questions about, the state of the country and what's going on and what can churches do. And so that, Pete, is when we called you, my other Pete, to join us in this conversation. So let me just start it off. Is this something that our churches should be worried about, should be concerned about?
Should they be worried about it? Not necessarily. With the number of churches, especially in California, and the preponderance of these types of incidents, the likelihood of this happening at any one given church is minuscule. It's very, very small, but it's not zero. And so it should be something that, while not preoccupied with, church staffs should be aware of and should have measures in place to mitigate or to address if and when that event does occur. You may go your whole career and never have a single outburst, or you may have several. It's going to depend on a lot of factors, like your geographic location, your individual involvement in local and state politics. So a lot of factors will come to bear, but I do think it would be prudent for every church governing body, every church staff, to be at least aware and to have some mechanisms in place to address it.
Well, I understand. And, even as a pastor, I've been in the ministry now 30 years. I've never had anything happen that was quite like what we saw in Minnesota. When those kind of things happen, of course, they get on all the major news cable shows and so forth, and it makes us all concerned, and it causes conversations. The good news is it's very, very rare. There are tens of millions of people every week that worship in some place of worship, whether in some of our churches or synagogues or temples or whatever. And we're only talking about a handful. You could almost count them on your two hands that happen over the course of the year. And so Pete's right. It's not going to probably ever happen to you, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be prepared and talk about it. And through the years, there's always been conversations in the churches I've been, and I've been part of different size churches. So you have different types of conversations depending on the size, and also those, what's going on in your community, things of that nature may come into play. And there's different levels of disturbances. There can be things that happen in your parking lot, on a sidewalk, there can be things that happen then coming into your buildings. And each one of those you really need to talk through and and it's not something necessarily that you have to deal with the whole church congregation knowing about, but somewhere inside your organization, there should be a handful of people that just know what to do and how to do it and what the process should be.
So would this be on this, like what we heard on the news in Minnesota? Yes, rare. But I've heard lots of pastors talk about that one person who stood up and started pumping his fist during the sermon. Is that on the same scale, Pete? Would the protocols be the same? What's sort of the ABCs of how to respond when that happens?
Yeah, it's similar, but it isn't exactly the same. One might be a spontaneous outburst, or it might be pre-planned. The other one is clearly pre-planned and intended to disrupt. And the intent kind of goes to the heart of how you might address the issue. So, for instance, talking about the person who just stands up to disrupt individually, you might just have a deacon or an usher or a couple of elders come and escort the person out. And you always want to try to de-escalate any situation at the lowest level possible. There again, you might have an organized disruption where a deacon or an elder or even a group of people aren't going to be able to stop that from happening. And that's where having a much more formalized plan in place is gonna really bear more fruit. So churches are going to deal with a lot of the instances Jason's talking about, someone in the parking lot or someone coming into the lobby. Oftentimes that's going to be requesting some sort of donation or handout. And they may be unsavory, or they may have, some addiction issues or some mental health issues. And you want to deal with those as sort of quickly and quietly as possible. Um, when we're talking about a large scale disruption, that's something completely different. And that is almost always going to require some sort of law enforcement intervention. And so there are some state and even federal statutes that will come to bear in those instances, in the larger scale disruptions. And we can sort of unpack those as we go here.
Yeah, and I think most pastors that are listening to this understand those differences. And so we're affirming what they understand. And then I think that's important that you have ministry related incidents where somebody's hurt, they're broken, they're disturbed. Maybe the message, the sermon itself touched a nerve. And pastors usually, can be prepared with their elders and leaders to minister to that person. That's a disruption. You're almost you're saying, okay, the Lord wants us to minister in this way today. And it captures that moment, and you try to love that person. But then what we're going to probably talk about going forward is, what about when that person is not interested in being ministered to? They're there to totally disrupt, to totally hijack your service. And then, of course, the worst part would be to maybe want to cause harm. But Pete, if I could ask you, because maybe some don't understand that if a person their intention, they come with an intention and an agenda to disrupt, what rights and laws should we be aware of as pastors in churches?
Yeah, it's a great question. And unfortunately, most people don't know this, but a church in this regard under state law operates no different than any other entity that's open to the public. So you think about a grocery store or a dentist's office or any other place that's private but open to the public. So the first one is 415 of the Penal Code. California Penal Code 415 sections 1, 2, and 3 would govern would govern disturbances. So, for instance, 415 subsection 1 is challenging someone to a fight in public. That's illegal, as long as your intent is actually to start a fight with that person. Subsection 2 is causing a noise disturbance such that it invades the peace of another person. And this is going to be relevant to these kinds of disturbances in a church. If someone comes in, or a group of people come into a worship service with the intent to disrupt by causing noise or some sort of physical obstruction or any other way intruding on the peace of another, we call that sort of colloquially disturbing the peace. That's illegal. That's actually a misdemeanor in California. And subsection 3 of 415 is using coarse or profane language such that it is likely to invoke a violent response. And that one is a very seldom cited law, but it's a law on the books. And this is going to often come to bear because in a place of worship, it is, I would argue, a lot easier to use coarse language that might invoke a violent response. So the subsection number 2 is going to be the one that's most common. And that's going to be the one where you're going to want to have the police respond and most likely effectuate an arrest. So that's just one of the laws that pertains to these kinds of disturbances. There's another one, though, that people often don't think about, and it's trespassing. 602 of the California Penal Code is a whole slew of subsections that pertain to trespassing. Subsection K talks about trespassing on land that is private or under the control of an agent, and again, causing some sort of interference with the normal course of business or the normal occupation of that land. And churches fall under that statute.
I don't think a lot of people realize that a church is private property because we invite the public there to have a public meeting and we're doing public speaking. Sometimes many people just assume, oh, this is a public space. It's actually not. A church is a private property. And when you use that word trespass, that's so important because that is a legal situation that if you feel like somebody's on your church property that is not welcome or no longer welcome, you can deem that they are trespassing. And for me as a pastor, what we taught our team to do is you politely ask them to leave and you politely let them know that they're no longer welcome on the property. Now you've done everything you need to do to establish the moment that if they continue to stay, they are technically trespassing. So at that point, if we were to call 911 and have a police officer show up, we could say this person is trespassing. And legally now we're protected in every situation of that moment. Am I right about that, Pete?
You're absolutely correct. And I think the confusion lies in that it's a place typically open to the public. So people will assume sometimes that it's public property. It is absolutely private property, and private property rights attach, meaning if someone is there with the intent to harm or injure, you don't even necessarily need, although it is prudent, you don't need to ask them to leave, according to subsection K. As long as their intent is to disrupt the course of business, then that satisfies that subsection. Now, subsection 1 of that same section is exactly what you're talking about, Jason. Asking the person to leave, whereupon they refuse, they're now in violation of that subsection. So I think that's a fantastic approach. You politely ask them to leave. You tell them, you make it very clear, you are no longer welcome on this premises. And when they refuse, they've satisfied the elements of 602 subsection 1, trespassing. That's when you call the police, and you do need to let the police officer who responds know this person's not welcome. I have already admonished them as much, and they are refusing to leave. In fact, you should let the dispatcher know when you place that call, whoever's going to place that call. There's a person here in our church building. They're causing a disturbance. They're disrupting the worship service. We've asked them to leave, and they are refusing, because that's how the dispatcher is going to let the responding officer know. They're going to give them those notes of the call as they're being dispatched to your location.
And I would say to that, Pete, in my experiences, I've had to do this several times. And sometimes, many of the time, most of the times, it had to do with someone you could tell they were on a substance or something like that, or there was one of those types of situations. So we were compassionate for them. We cared for that person. But at that moment, I had to care more for the safety of the congregation, right? So you have to balance that I care about that person, but I care more for my congregation. And that telling the dispatcher and the police officer that you have deemed this person unwelcome and this you consider trespassing. I'd been told by officers in the past that helped the officer. It empowered the officer. They knew now then they had all the legal rights to do what they needed to do to help us protect that congregation. And so it was a way for me and the law enforcement to be in sync on what we were trying to do. And the good news is, all throughout the years, our law enforcement, we had always tried to build a good relationship with them, so they knew us, and they also knew that they were at a church. So They tried to use as much compassion and gentleness as they possibly could, but they knew they had the power to do whatever they needed to do, and that's very important.
Yeah, that brings up two very important points. One, we're going to be dealing with two different types of disturbances. One that you're referring to, which might be a person under the influence, or like we said, dealing with a mental health crisis. And police officers are typically well situated to address those issues and get that person to where they need to get to, whether it's a hospital, whether it's to jail, or just off the premises. But the other situation is the intentional disruption, the activist group, the protesters. Now, the end result is the same. They're not welcome, but they're not welcome for different reasons. One may cause harm, but they may just be dealing with some sort of addiction or other issues. The other one may cause harm, but that's to carry out some sort of political or other social agenda. And either way, it's up to the individuals in the church to determine when that person has overstayed their welcome and when they're going to activate law enforcement. But there's one other section that's important to know, and this is helpful for anybody who's going to find themselves in either situation. That's 837 of the Penal Code, and that's what we call a private person's arrest. Sometimes we call it a citizen's arrest. And this is such a misunderstood concept, but it's very simple when you unpack it. Any person, any private citizen is empowered pursuant to 837 of the California Penal Code to make an arrest when they observe a crime in progress. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to carry handcuffs and you're going to go make a physical arrest. But what it does mean is when you call the police, you have to let the police officer responding know something very important. I am desirous of prosecution on behalf of the entity, on behalf of the church, and I am placing this person under arrest. So the officer then sort of removes their responsibility to observe the crime and make the arrest. They're taking you at your word that you observed the crime and you're effectuating the arrest. Now the officer is just taking custody of the person. There's a form you fill out. Every agency has one. We call it a private person's arrest form. It's very simple. You put your name. It's all pre-filled out. You sign it. You date it. Now there's a caveat. You have to be willing to participate in the follow-up prosecution. So this is more likely going to be relevant to that second scenario. Purposeful agitators in your congregation disrupting your worship service for whatever reason. And these are the people that you want to take legal action against. So in that instance, you call the police. You can cite to trespassing, the 602 section. You can cite to disturbing the peace, the 415 section. And if they do cause harm, there's a whole other slew of applicable statutes. But it's important to know you as an individual, as a private citizen, as a congregant of the church, or as an official at the church, have the legal right to place one or more persons under arrest. The police will then take custody of them, citing to your observations of the crime. And then they'll take them to jail, they'll write the report, and your obligation is just that when the prosecution comes, when it's time to go to court, you will participate with that process and see it through to its conclusion.
I feel like that really speaks to the person who is making the call, which might not be the pastor in that moment, depending on how they've set up their security systems. And so you're saying the person who says those words to the dispatcher, whoever answers the phone, then is now beholden to the processes that come following because they said it, or can they say it on behalf of the organization, the church itself?
Well, it doesn't necessarily need to be the person who places the call, but it does need to be an individual on behalf of the entity. So using our example, Sarah, if you were to make the call, but Jason, you were the one that is desirous of prosecution on behalf of your church, then Sarah could still make the call to dispatch. That's just getting the officers to the location. Jason, you would then interface with the police who respond and say, I'm placing these people under private person's arrest, and I'll fill out the form, and I will cooperate with the prosecution of this case. So it doesn't have to be the same person, but someone does need to sort of take that initiative or that responsibility. It doesn't need to be the pastor or the figurehead, the CEO, but it does need to be a person.
So, okay, we understand now kind of what the church's rights are should they find themselves in a situation like this. But I'm wondering, Jason, and you can speak to this, are our churches prepared? Have they had these conversations in advance? Have they created the team? Does everybody have their role? And Pete, what should a pastor do today so that if they ever find themselves in this situation, everyone deploys to where they're supposed to go and does what they're supposed to do?
I think, first of all, every responsible pastor has probably had this conversation with some of his leaders and volunteers that help out during worship services and events. And as we've already said, that could vary in depending on the context. But one thing's for sure, you do need to have some conversations and some plans. But I will say that the laws here in the state of California have just recently changed. So probably whatever you've done up to this point, you need to start completely over. You need to, anything you've got in writing, anything in your files, pull it out, shred it, start completely over. And I'm speaking specifically of the what's called SB 1454. That law came into effect January 1st of last year. And it basically, up until that point, churches were exempt from certain laws that had to do with security. Churches are no longer exempt from those laws. And it's a lot. It's complex. It's more than we can cover on this podcast.
Yeah.
But you just need to know it has radically changed from we were exempt, now we're not exempt, which means if we're going to have a security team or a security plan, it is a lot more complex now than it used to be. And maybe Pete could help with some of those details.
Yeah.
Sure. And it's, I would argue it may not be more complex. It's just that the rules that apply to all other entities now apply to churches as well. So what SB 1454 has done is removed the exemption for a period of time. It does have a sunset of 2029. But for the time being, and while it's in effect, it's removed the exemption from houses of worship. And really the operative word is going to be security, because it's really going to define going forward how a church defines its staff, the staff in particular that are there to keep the congregation, the parishioners safe.
Whether they're paid or volunteer.
Exactly. And it doesn't matter in this regard whether they're paid or volunteer. If they're security, and if you're giving them certain implements or certain responsibilities to see to security, they now fall under this regulatory body. The BSIS, the Bureau of Security and Investigative Services, has for years and years in California regulated the security industry. Any working security guard has to go through that governing agency to get their guard card and additional certifications, for instance, to carry a baton, pepper spray, or a firearm. Up until this Senate bill, churches were exempt from having their security staff go through those rigors. So what that does is now any security staff in a church has to go through those same procedures to become licensed security. And if they're volunteers, it doesn't change anything. If you give them some sort of insignia, or you give them some sort of implement, some sort of tools or weapons, even if you just call them your security team, you're subjecting yourself to the oversight and the regulation of the BSIS.
In fact, I heard no matter what you call them, if they're doing something that is about security, then they're security.
So you can't even call them greeters?
Well, so you could, and there is a fine distinction, but there is a distinction. For instance, if you have greeters, ushers, hospitality staff, or something of that ilk who has a primary responsibility of welcoming your congregants, handing them a bulletin for the day's events, giving directions when people don't know where to go, those types of things, and that's their primary responsibility. But secondary to that, they will respond to a disturbance. They're not per se security, as long as certain benchmarks are not met, one of which is the title, security. So we'll just call them a greeter for the sake of this illustration. If you have a greeter, but you tell your greeter, hey, look, in the event that there's ever a disturbance, can you please help diffuse that situation? Can you maybe bring the person out of the sanctuary and talk them down and try to work them through whatever issue they're going through? That doesn't quite rise to the level of security staff. Now, if you tell that same greeter, hey, look, anything that you see that looks suspicious, that might be a threat, I want you to report. That is one of the primary functions of a security guard. you have now empowered them to conduct security, any kind of surveillance, any kind of alert level that you're imposing on them. You're now elevating their status to volunteer security. So you can still have your greeters and your ushers and all of the other lay staff that works. Let's be honest, that every church relies on. You can have all of those things as long as their primary function is not to maintain the safety and security of your facilities.
And so, what do you do with people in your congregation that maybe have concealed carry laws? How do they play into all of this? That
Yeah, that's a great.
sometimes, let me just say this before you ask. Sometimes it's concealed carry, and then sometimes it's like off-duty police officers or retired police officers and military. I've got military in some of our churches, so bring them into this conversation.
That's a great point, especially in light of recent legislation that has made obtaining a concealed carry permit much, much easier in California. California used to be one of the most difficult states to obtain a concealed weapons permit. It's now much easier. So you've got a couple of different factions there. Military, for the sake of this illustration, is going to fall under civilian unless they're on duty. So if there's a church that's on a military base or they're otherwise tasked to guard a certain church or facility, they're otherwise going to fall under the same laws as civilians do for the purposes of concealed carry. Police officers, whether they're active duty or retired, kind of fall under a little bit different set of rules, but ultimately it's not going to make that much difference to the church staff. It's really going to be dependent on the church's tolerance for having concealed weapons in its congregation. Now, I won't presume to know what each individual church wants or does not want in their church. What I will say is it is the right of the church to decide. So there's two different routes that we go here. One is the right to self-defense, and everyone has that right. So when you're in church, if a disturbance occurs, if someone is threatening imminent harm, the person who is threatened has the right to self-defense, or a person who observes the threat has the right to defense of others in the likelihood of threat of injury or death. So as an example, someone comes into a church brandishing a firearm. If there are concealed carriers in the church, they have the right to defend themselves and others from that threat by drawing and using their own firearms. That's separate and apart from being requested or being tasked by the church to provide security services. Now, if a person is armed, whether it's concealed or exposed, and they're tasked with providing security services, SB 1454 places them staunchly in the security, the paid employed security bubble. If you carry a weapon into a church with the express understanding that you're providing security services, you are employed, whether it's by the church or by a third-party contractor, as a security guard. And that's irrespective of law enforcement status, military status, or civilian status. So if the church is going to say, hey, we encourage concealed carry, great. If the church is going to say, we encourage concealed carry and we would like you to provide security services, you have now employed that person as a security guard. And that's not necessarily bad. I don't want to misconstrue the idea that you've now violated some rule. It just means you're now subject to the regulations of the BSIS. Chiefly, you have to get that person certified as a security guard. You don't have to pay them. In order to be a working security guard, they just have to provide the service for some sort of consideration. Consideration being the legal term for some recompense, whether it's you provide them a uniform or the implements of being a security guard, or if it is for a stipend, some sort of pay. If the church is providing some sort of consideration for those services, they are employing them as a security guard. It's important to know because other things will attach. If you provide them a stipend, now you're subjecting yourself to additional payroll taxes and all of the regulations that go with employing people. And there is incurred liability when that person is carrying out their duties. So if they get into some sort of altercation that results in injury or death to another person, the church has accepted that liability, and whatever insurance the church is carrying is going to incur that as well. So again, it's not to persuade or dissuade anybody, but it is important to understand the distinction. If someone is unarmed and not providing security, you're largely not going to run afoul of 1454. You're not, quote unquote, employing security guards. Whether they're armed or not, but they are providing security services, they are going to fall under the the guidelines and the rigors of the BSIS.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is a complicated conversation, and we just want our church leaders to know that this is in the conversation right now, not be caught unawares, right, Jason?
That's right. And with all that we've said today, some are going to realize, you know what, I need to go do a deeper dive.
Yeah.
And
That
so
would be
you
the
can.
win. Yeah.
That's right. And you
That'd
can
be a win.
go everything we're talking about, you can go do a deeper dive on your own and you'll find
Yeah.
it. There are some companies out there that help you with this. It could be your insurance company that could help you. There's other companies like I was talking to someone from Church West the other day, and they said, "Hey, check out the shepherd360.com. That's a whole company that works with churches and just kind of walks them through this, even provides some training." And then there's certain, you may have someone locally in your community you can just hire out third party as security for your property if you feel that's the need. And then that kind of simplifies a lot of this because those people would be certified and trained and meet all the
Yeah.
laws, of course.
Yeah.
So there's many, many different ways to deal with these issues. So it's a matter of getting your church leaders together, praying through this, talking through this, thinking through it, and being willing to adapt and change and evolve as you learn and you grow and you become wiser with it.
As a church here in California.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a good word. Pete, is there anything else then that you want to bring to the attention of our church leaders while we have you?
Yeah, Jason had mentioned something a while ago and then touched on it again. And I want to talk about it because it goes to the topic of training. And Jason, you had said something about the assumption that law enforcement officers and concealed carry permit holders are well trained. And I'm oftentimes the spoiler, and I hate to be so, but I want to dispel a few myths here. And one of which is the assumption that because you have a concealed weapons permit, you're well trained. And the other is because you're a police officer, you're well trained. Now, this is going to be a hot take, and this is going to be a little bit unpopular with some people, but just follow me.
Yeah, you said it, not me.
I know, I know. And I love my boys and girls in blue. However, not all entities are equal. And that includes law enforcement agencies. So going to concealed weapons holders, the training requirement to obtain your concealed weapons permit is minimal. It isn't a very high bar to entry. You have to go through an 8-hour course in understanding safe weapon handling and the functionality of your chosen weapon or weapons that you're going to register for concealed carry. That by no means makes you an expert even on weapon system, but certainly not on tactics. So you may know just enough to get through that 8-hour training, and not all training agencies or entities are created equal as well. So the quality of training is going to vary from place to place. But that's the only real training required. And the only other barriers to entry are a psychological evaluation and an interview with the agency that's going to issue the concealed weapons permit. But it's not a lot. It's not a deep dive. So I would love to think that concealed weapons holders are responsible enough to go to the range and to study tactics, for instance, to understand your backdrop if you're going to draw and exhibit your firearm. But not everyone is going to do that. So don't assume, pastors and church staff, that because someone has the concealed weapons permit that they've achieved some level of training that makes them eminently qualified to handle a threat. They just may not have. This is also true for police officers. Now, California is a very well-regulated state when it comes to police officer training. We are governed by something called POST, Peace Officer Standards and Training, and it is very rigorous, and it does spell out for us the minimum requirements that we have to achieve in order to become and maintain our certifications as police officers. But the firearms portion of that training, again, is sort of de minimis. We only have to qualify by law once a year. Most agencies, by prudence, do it more. My agency, for example, does it every month. But even once a month is not necessarily going to make you an expert. It is going to make you better trained than most lay people. But also, tactical training varies from agency to agency and officer to officer. as a theoretical example, an agency in rural Northern California might not have an officer as well trained as a SWAT officer from LAPD. The training quality, frequency, and intensity is going to be very different. So just so that everyone is aware, also don't assume that because you have a police officer in your congregation, they are ultimately trained to handle any threat. We like to think we are. We're always the heroes of our own stories, let's be honest. But the very real fact is not all training is created equal, and not all officers are going to rise to the same level of their training.
That's very fair. In fact, there's a pastor friend of mine, and we're all Second Amendment rights advocates, and we are fully on board with concealed carry laws, and just blue-blooded Americans, you know what I mean? And so the thing is, though, we had in his church, and I knew this situation. One of the men in his church said, "Pastor, I got my concealed carry permit." And the pastor said, "Oh, well, right on, way to go. Listen, you're not allowed to bring your gun in this church." And he had never said that to the other ones, but we knew this guy is so accident prone, concealed carry permit or not. Brother, you're not bringing it in here. So,
can you put that on the sign? You, named person, are not allowed.
That's right.
Yeah, in the Army, we refer to that guy as Carl. Carl is that guy.
You better hope his real name isn't Carl, because that would be unfortunate.
Concealed weapons welcomed, except Carl.
Except Carl. That's good. I think I might put that on a lot of churches.
Yeah.
We all got a Carl in our
because everyone has a Carl.
We have a person on the board who shall remain nameless, who is at mostly all of our events, and I always feel very safe because he's an officer, and I guarantee you he's one of those very qualified ones. And so this is a little shout out to him. He knows who he is, and he listens to the podcast. Also from the North, so, he's very good. So what I heard, basically, from all of this is, first and foremost, local church, please show love to the local police agency. Which begs the question, do police officers really love donuts? Because that seems like a really easy way for a church to kind of ingratiate themselves with local law enforcement. And
Only
I got to
your
ask.
sister would ask that.
The tropes are showing.
I'm asking. We love donuts. I mean, it's like a commonality.
Yeah, I would say that police officers don't love donuts any more or any less than Southern Baptists.
Whoa.
We love them. They're everywhere.
Do with that
so either take your donuts or take your Chick-fil-A and go show love to the local law enforcement agency. All right. Well, Pete, thank you so much for being here. This was very helpful and really educational and informative. We always end our show with a funny story, and we love to put our guest in the hot seat.
Okay, well, the level of funny is subjective here, but I will tell you a story that's near to me. And I mentioned at the start of this, I love this job. And police officers, by and large, love our calling. We love our profession. We're the heroes of our stories. I mentioned that. And most days I say, so only half joking, I would do this job for free. It's that fantastic. It's that amazing. We get to walk under the police tape. We get the front row seat. We get to see things as they're unfolding rather than later on in the news. And I love it. I love everything about it, except for when I don't, because some days there's just not enough money in the world. You couldn't pay me enough to do this job. And I was having one of those days one day. I was working night shift as the graveyard shift sergeant, and that's already upsetting. And I was getting ready to go have my first meal of the day, which is dinner. So I went out to a local restaurant, and it was one of those where you have to stand in line to order, and there was a long line. Of course there was. I was already having a bad day, and there's a long line for me to get my dinner. And then as I'm getting close to the front of the line, this elderly woman walks up and just cuts right in front of me in the line without saying a word.
Were you in uniform?
I was in uniform. I was on duty. And she just steps right in front of me in line. And I will tell you, I'm not proud of the things that I thought in my mind, but I'm a professional, so they only occurred in my mind. And I thought, this lady right here just cut in front of me in line. She saw me there. There was 3 or 4 other people behind me. I know she saw me. And I know she sees that I'm in uniform, and just the irreverence of this woman to just step in front of me in line. And then she get, and okay, she's an elderly woman. I'm polite. I was raised correctly, more or less. And so I said, you know what? I'm not even going to address it. Go ahead. And then this woman gets to the front of the line and she says, I'd like to pay for this officer's meal.
Oh, of course she did.
And the
you sinned in your heart
that were heaped on my head. Oh. And she looked at me and she said, if that's okay. And I said, ma'am, of course that's okay. Thank you so much. That's so thoughtful of you. Now, I didn't tell her what I had just been saying under my breath a moment ago, right? But I'll tell you what that did for me. I was having a terrible day, and that just reinstilled for me just a little glimmer of hope and humanity. As police officers, we see the underbelly of society, the worst of the worst, and we have to deal with those situations. And then we have to go home to our families, and we have to pack that away. And it's a very difficult ask. So this was one of those moments, just a little spark of hope. And it was a little unorthodox, I'll admit, the way she went about it. But God bless that woman for her generosity, for her kindness. I thought I was here being nice, letting her cut in front of me, but she was being genuinely kind, just offering to pay for my meal. And then she, of course, thanked me for my service. And it was such a wonderful interaction at the end of it. So that really sort of set the mood for the rest of my evening. And it really humbled me in a lot of ways. I'll never forget that. That story will make its way into my memoirs someday. But wherever that woman is, it was just so gracious of her. I was so thankful.
Oh, that's a real blessing from the Lord through that sweet lady.
That's good.
Well, thanks again for being here. Thanks, Jason, for making time as well to be with us. If you have any topics or other things that you would like us to talk about, you can always email us at podcast@csbc.com. Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye.